What's up, everybody? Another week, NLL Weekly. Thank you so much for spending part of your evening, day. We are actually live. We've been doing taping and then kind of streaming a little bit of a behind-the-scenes thing, but scheduling conflicts and all this other stuff this week kind of forced us to do live this week. So we appreciate for those of you who will pop on here as the stream goes. We usually would set it up where we would do at least kind of an awareness piece of like, hey, we're going to be doing a live show. We haven't done live like we did last year. And so the ability to actually like have people pop in here is going to be fun and have a chance to kind of talk with some folks live again, because we haven't done that in a while. So again, if you're just joining us, NLL Weekly, thank you so much for being a part of this. My name is Chris. That's Dan. Always appreciate you guys spending time with us. Again, NLL Weekly also available on Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spreaker, and Podcast Addict, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, our channel on YouTube, NLL Weekly, is where you can go to get live feeds or post feed shows. Basically, you can watch them back, play them for hidden messages, whatever you want to do basically with them. So you never know when we're going to sneak one of those in, Dan. That happens sometimes.
I've been laying stuff in backwards the entire season. I don't surprised you haven't noticed and completed the scavenger hunt yet, to be honest.
If you play some of our shows backward, you'll get a really awesome recipe that Dan's grandmother's chili is if you play one of the episodes backwards. So as always, NLL Weekly brought to you by Car Stereo One. They are our main sponsor, Parker Lopez and his team. Thank you so much for always giving us the time. Of course, you can check them out online, carstereo1.com. Call them 419-474-5553. Visit them in person, 3120 Central Avenue. Anything your car basically needs to be customized, upgraded, Car Stereo One does it now. So they do wraps, they do wheels and tires, they do audio systems, they do window tint, they do stuff on your boat, they'll do stuff to your motorcycle. Anything you need done, they will do at Car Stereo One. So we thank Parker and his team over there. Again, 419-474-5553. You can check them out in person, 3120 Central Avenue, or online, carstereo1.com. So you're just going to get Dan and I tonight. We don't have a coach. Again, scheduling conflicts. We're going to have somebody on Monday behind the scenes. Dan has more broadcasting responsibilities. He works for the UT Rockets. They had a basketball game Monday. I was going to do the show by myself, and then our coach wasn't able to do it because, as we'll talk about later in the show, we had NLL awards handed out this week, so we'll talk about those in a little bit. Then I had stuff for BCSN Tuesday and Wednesday. You had a football game last night. This is really the only night that Dan and I were able to make this work. And I will say, we love doing this so much. It was like, we have to figure out a time of when we're going to do this. We just didn't know how and when. And so it's kind of a hodgepodge thing, but it's just going to be us tonight kind of talking about what we saw the last couple of weeks, what we witnessed in the first round of the playoffs. We'll talk a ton about Perrysburg-Whitmer tonight, obviously the game that you and I will see tomorrow. We'll touch upon Anthony Wayne and what they were able to do against Start. We'll talk about Napoleon and Findlay, their first round games after they had byes, and then also touch on some of the other area teams that played last week and are moving on to the next round of the playoffs. But as we dive right into it, Dan, Perrysburg Ignatius, when we talked about this last week, I had said to you, my fear, if I was Dirk Connor in that Perrysburg team, was what everybody else had said. That was not your average number 12 seed. That was not a 12 seed that was coming in with basically as a really bad football team. Like Ignatius bad is probably below average in the Northern Lakes League. And we knew that it was going to be a challenge. It was that. Perrysburg needed overtime to win that game. There are positives and negatives that I would take out of that if I'm Perrysburg based off of what happened to me in week 10. The positive, if you're Perrysburg, you ran the ball a hell of a lot better last Friday night than you did in week 10. Brady Maxwell runs for over 160, I think it was. And then you had Liam Nowakowski, who touched the ball once for a yard in the week 10 matchup. He scores 3 touchdowns and runs for 122 last week. they ran the ball so much better last week than they did in week 10. The negative, if you're Perrysburg, and what caused you so many problems, and we'll dive more into this here in a second as far as what it means for this week. But the problem, if you're Perrysburg, Ignatius kind of had their way on the ground with you, especially in that first half. Liam Colwell, I think it's Liam, ended up running for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. The other back, Bobinski, ended up with, I think, around 50 yards. He didn't play much in the second half, but he ran for 50 yards in the first half. And really, Ignatius was able to drive the field at the end of that fourth quarter because they were able to control the line of scrimmage and drive down the field and ended up being able to punch the ball in on a fourth down. I go back to the previous week, and if you're Dirk Connor, you're probably saying, all right, we got a little bit of mojo back on the offensive side. But the big question coming out of, again, last week is, okay, that's all well and good, but can you do it against Whitmer this weekend? I don't know that they can. We'll talk about that a little more in depth here in a second, but just based off of what I saw, there was positives and negatives. You congratulate him for getting up off the mat. I said this last week to you in person. It is so hard when you lose in week 10 mentally to get the team locked back in. It is so difficult because people think that's just a flip of a switch. It is not. When you come out of week 10 and you have a disappointing end to your regular season, and then you're supposed to just kind of forget everything that happened the previous 2.5 months and just be ready to play in the playoffs, that doesn't happen. That's not how it works. So the fact that they did it, credit to them. That's not an easy thing to do. All of it said, though, you still got to stop the run. They had a trouble doing that. They did run the ball better, which will help them tomorrow night if they're able to do that again. But a mixed bag, if you will, for Perrysburg.
Absolutely. And there's one factor that you didn't mention that also may swing that game Perrysburg's way, and maybe not go. It can't be underestimated. Is that also that Ignatius turned that ball over 5 times,
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether you're a good or bad Ignatius team. You can't turn the ball over 5 times and expect to win any football game, let alone a playoff game. So the fact that they forced 5 turnovers and still needed to get to overtime, it would in fact have me worried, mostly because, like you said, Ignatius was able to pound the rock, especially in the fourth quarter. And we saw the exact same thing 2 weeks ago against Whitmer. And when we talked throughout that game, I really could not stop being impressed by the Whitmer offensive line and how well they did own the line of scrimmage, especially the left side of that line. If I'm Perrysburg, and I would be trying to figure out a lot of schemes to try to find a way to play against that strength. And it's going to be difficult, especially since Whitmer is going to play to their strength, which is running the ball down your throat.
And we talked about this a lot last week too, but you think about what that running back room is like at Whitmer now, and I will state again, in my opinion, it's peak performance at this point. Like, this is as good as that running back room is going to get, I think. When you consider that none of those guys were 100% healthy altogether all season, Jaden Jones has been fighting an injury all year. Obviously, Jamon and Joey got hurt in that Finley game, sat out the Clay game, then ended up playing week 10. Both looked really good. Joey, phenomenal, led the way rushing-wise, carry-wise. Jamon, phenomenal. Jaden, in what I would say is probably a short stint, played really well, ended up being the second leading rusher yardage-wise. To have a 1-2-3 punch, it's one thing to have 2 guys. To have 2 backs, 2 good backs, you kind of need 2 good backs to be a good football team. If you have a third that you can throw at teams, and you can be in 2 back sets, and you can have multiple guys on the field, and you can also find creative ways to get those guys involved at the same time. When Whitmer's been at their best, and you can do this all the way back to when I started covering games, which I know I am not been doing it for that long. It's 15 years, but in 15 years, the years that Whitmer has been good, they've had 2 really good backs. Period. That's part of the formula. You cannot be good if you only have 1 really good back. 19 might be your exception when it was Jared Banks, but Jared Banks was such a freak in 19 that he kind of made up for the fact that you didn't have a second back. But even then, that reared its ugly head at the end of the season because Jared was so beat up at the end of the year and there wasn't a second guy to help take some of the punishment off of Jared. Regardless, though, the years that they've been really good and they've made deep postseason runs, they've had 2 really good backs. It's just the way it is. And this year they have 3. I wonder, does that mean that they're able to be a little bit better than maybe what other people have? I mean, Jaden Jones could go and start for just about any other team in the league at running back. And you've got 2 other guys that the staff deems better than Jaden at this point. Now, I don't know that they are, but they've certainly been healthier than Jaden has been. But the idea that you have 2 guys above a guy that could start at just about any other place in the league at running back, or with split time at running back on any other team in the area, I just don't know what you do with that if you're an opposing team. And I know we're kind of getting into the preview piece of this, but that's where, when we talk about Perrysburg struggling against the running with Ignatius last week, especially in that first half, what are you going to do when it's 3 guys? Say you shut down one, or you have a good night against one. Can you do it against the second one? Can you do it against the third? If they do, hats off to Perrysburg, because they will absolutely be moving on to the regional semifinal. That's a tall order to ask to be done when you know that it's not just one guy you've got to worry about or tire out. You can split the bulk of the carries amongst 3 different guys and have even wear and tear, have fresh legs in the fourth quarter. Good luck. I mean, honestly, and that goes with any team they play. I mean, should Whitmer win, should Perrysburg win, the likely opponent on the other side of the bracket is going to be Lakewood St. Ed's. That's going to be a really hard game. I don't care who it is, but I think Whitmer would be better poised, and this isn't the homer in me talking. I think Whitmer would be better poised to maybe beat St. Ed's because they can control the clock, and they have 3 guys that can hurt you, and you don't have to have Jamon get beat up 24 times in a game. You can have maybe Jamon and Joey and Jaden each get beat up 10, 15 times in a game, and that looks a lot different on the wear and tear of a postseason than when you're talking about a guy taking 30 carries in a game and trying to be healthy and have the same burst and the same level of physicality in the fourth quarter. It's a totally different situation.
Well, that's exactly what that point you made right there about the efficiency in the fourth quarter. When you're able to bring in somebody who has a smaller number of carries on him, by the time you get to that final stanza, is huge. And that's the case at every level. The difference, you think, with a lot of teams, and as you kind of look up and down this region, St. Ed might be the exception to this rule, is that you don't often have defensive lines that are deep enough.
Correct.
That can consistently stop the run and do it against fresh legs for 4 quarters. It's the old cliche of, you do run the football hard in the first half to wear out the defense. Well, it goes both ways. And if you only have one guy who can actually handle those touches, the wear and tear is going to be equal. But if you can send 3 different guys, and 3 different guys who have a similar enough running style that they're all physical runners. We've said it multiple times that this running back room seems to not just invite contact, but seek it out. Like they just prefer, like that's their running style, is that they just can't accelerate unless they have at least one defender hanging on them. It's a weird trait, but it works for them. And if that is the constant pounding you're inflicting on a front seven, I mean, it's gonna test depth quickly, and that is an easy way to break big plays, and also to open things up over the middle, especially in the passing game.
I think that's the other key here is Whitmer did not throw the ball a whole lot in game number 1. And when you go into a big matchup like Whitmer did in week 10, there's no doubt that the Panthers had some kind of strategy in the passing game. We didn't see it. We didn't have to see it. They were so good on the ground, we didn't have to see it. So I don't know, nor does Perrysburg for that matter, what was Whitmer going to do if they had to throw the ball. Now, clearly, if they had to do nothing but throw the ball, they would have been in trouble because Whitmer has to be able to run the football to also be successful. You got to be balanced. But Perrysburg has no idea what bag of tricks Whitmer had or where they think they could attack Perrysburg in the secondary because we didn't have to see it. Carter Bourne threw nothing but screen passes. Outside of 2 passes to Maddox Milam downfield on 4th down conversions, we didn't see Carter throw the ball downfield. It was all bubble screens. It was all stay screens. That's what we saw. What did it look like if they had to go vertical? I don't know. And the sad part or the scary part, if you're Perrysburg, is you don't really know either. A lot of people have talked about this week, what adjustments is Perrysburg going to make to counteract what happened to them in week 10? And this is the 2 questions I have, and I'll do one for each team. The question I have for Whitmer, and I guess it's kind of a 2-parter. One is, what does the bye week mean of how sharp you are? Whitmer definitely needed the bye week to get healthy. We knew that. We talked about it on our postgame show, how much that was going to help that piece of it. In fact, Riley Keller, who was the quarterback, as everybody knows, even said what we wouldn't have given in 2017 to have a bye week in the first round when they were the 1 seed in their region because they were really beat up going into the first round of the playoffs. They wouldn't have gotten everybody back healthy, but they would have had an extra week to get rested and get guys back a little bit further in that recovery process without having to play anybody. So what does that mean for Whitmer? And we're going to find out because clearly the Panthers are not the only team that had a bye last week. There's 16 teams in each division that is going to experience, did we handle the bye well? How sharp are we? The rest versus rust debate, all that stuff. But the part 2 or part B of this question that I have for Whitmer, and this is the one that is more nuanced. And I actually asked Justin Keller, for those of you who are going to listen to the game tomorrow in the pregame show, I asked him this question tonight, and I'm not going to give his answer, but I basically said, what's the balance between making sure that you respect that the game plan you had in week 10 worked really well? And what's that balance of knowing that you can't do a carbon copy of what you did the week prior and be successful? Because if Perrysburg hasn't come in, and Dirk Connor is one of the best coaches in in Northwest Ohio, his defensive coordinator, Mike Ward, coached collegiately. He's one of the best in the area. They're going to have answers for what happened in week 10. There's no doubt they will have answers. But at the same time, what you did in week 10 was so successful, you can't just chuck it out the window and start over, because that would be negligence on the other side of it. So what's that spot in the middle? What's that happy medium of keeping elements of what you did in week 10, but also having plan Bs or ways to adjust if the things that you did 2 weeks ago don't work as well as they did? So what's the adjustment if Perrysburg adjusts? And that is not an easy thing to do, to get that balance, to get that recipe just right. That's a hard thing for any coach to do, because you don't really know for sure going in tomorrow, is what we did in week 10 going to work as well as it did, or even remotely close to what it did 2 weeks ago. And what's the adjustment off of that? That's the number one question I have. Again, yeah, the bye is certainly a debate, and that that's that's really hard to quantify, and you won't know until you actually strap the pads on and get out there tomorrow. But the other piece to me that's way more of a difficult question to answer, and one that Whitmer is going to absolutely have to answer at some point tomorrow night, is where in the middle do you meet between what you did 2 weeks ago and then also knowing that you can't do exactly what you did 2 weeks ago and be successful. You're going to have adjustments off of that. And what's that balance? Because that's a hard thing to do, and you probably aren't going to know until you get into the first quarter of, hey, we're not running the ball as well as we did, or hey, they've been able to figure out this concept, or they know when we do this, they've been able to adjust to it, and it's not allowing us to get 6 yards a pop. Then they're going to have to make that adjustment, and are the adjustments going to be effective? I think that's got to be the number one question that Whitmer's got to answer tomorrow.
I think you kind of hit on that point. I know, well, last week we touched on this a little bit, and the danger of overthinking your adjustments in a possibility like this, and going so far one way or the other that you're actually doing damage to your team, is to taking them away from what they do. But I think you hit on exactly what you have to do is, sure, if it's, for example, if you're Whitmer, you're obviously going to keep a lot of run plays in that playbook for the week, but also have a plan ready to mix things up. Have a plan ready of a different schedule. If you constantly see Perrysburg coming out, like you said, if they figure out your concepts early, or if you're looking at sets that you didn't expect to see after that first drive, be ready to switch it up. Be ready to change up your schedule. And it's going to be those not halftime adjustments, but literally drive to drive adjustments, which could be the difference. And I know that sounds so getting so much into the minutia here, like, getting way, way down to that level. But that's kind of what you have to do at this point. Like, you have to figure out how to be ready to move. And also, this is how you spend your week, is also having your team ready to go. Hey, just be ready. Yes, keep plan A in mind and make sure you are well versed on that. But don't be surprised if you see bits of plan B start to make their way in the game based on what we're seeing. So always be on your toes on your own side of the field too.
And Justin Keller, it was funny. He and I were talking about it because he was a coach in 23 the last time that Perrysburg and Whitmer faced off in the playoffs. And he had said one of the mistakes he felt that they made in that second matchup is they went away from what worked in the first matchup against Perrysburg. And if you rewind to 23, that would have been Joey's sophomore year, Joey Morales' sophomore year, he and Jaden, that they pretty much did a very similar game plan. It wasn't as gaudy of numbers in 23, but they pretty much did the similar type of game plan against the Yellow Jackets in 23, which is they just ran down Perrysburg's throat. And that's how they won that game. In the second matchup, they did not do that as much. They threw it a heck of a lot more. They didn't run. They kind of abandoned the run in the first half. And it wasn't until they went back to the running game in the second half, and I don't know how much you remember that game, but Whitmer was down 20-0 in that game, scored 2 touchdowns late to make it 20-14, and had the football driving in the fourth quarter with a chance to go down and win the game pending the extra point. All of that, though, was set up off of the fact that they were able to start effectively running the football. And then all of a sudden your play actions start working. Your different eye candy that we talked about so much at the beginning of the year, moving guys around and changing sight lines and assignments and all that different stuff. Whitmer has to be able to get that recipe right, because if you don't, it's going to be really tough to duplicate the results. And as cliche as it sounds, or as basic as it might sound, the answer's probably in the middle somewhere between the adjustments and what you did the previous time you played. But I just don't see any other way for the Panthers to be able to be successful unless they get that combination just right tomorrow night. And that's the big question I have for Whitmer. On the other side, my big question for Perrysburg: can you hold up? And this is more of a defensive question. Can you hold up with your front seven against that defensive front, or against that offensive front, and Jamon, Joey, and Jaden? Perrysburg's going to score more than 3 points tomorrow. You can mark that down and hold me to it. Perrysburg's going to score more than 3 points. They're going to be better. They're going to run the ball. They're going to be successful. They're a good running team. Brady Maxwell is a good running quarterback. Liam Nowakowski is a good, solid high school running back. They're going to score more than 3 tomorrow night. All of it, though, boils down to the math here. We talked about this when we discussed the outcome of the game last week. You have to be 32 points better tomorrow night. You can't be 32 points better if you're getting gouged up front on the ground. You just won't. You might be 14 points better, might even be 21 points better. You're not going to be 5 touchdowns better. That's a big gap to make up if you can't stop the run. They have to make Whitmer throw the football. And I know I just said that we don't know what Whitmer had planned throwing the football, but if Whitmer beats you throwing the football, you tip your cap to them and say they're the better team. But you never once in that first matchup defensively made Whitmer uncomfortable. I can't think of any time in that game, even on the 4th downs, where it felt like Whitmer has to get this, because if they don't, the entire momentum or the entire outcome of this game becomes in doubt. I never felt that way. Now, they ended up going on to convert the 4th downs, and it solidified my feelings even further that Whitmer was in full control. But even if they hadn't, I wouldn't have felt much different about the Panthers' chances in that moment. So if you're Perrysburg and you can't stop all 3 of those guys, as hard as that sounds, if you can't do it, you are not going to win tomorrow night. And that's the question: is can you, for 4 quarters, hold that Whitmer team in check enough, much like we talked about? Perrysburg's going to score more points. Whitmer's going to break runs. They're too good not to. There's no way Dirk Connor's going in there thinking, we'll hold them to a yard of carry. That's not going to happen. Whitmer's going to have big runs. They're going to score points. They're going to move the ball on the ground. But more often than not, can you put Whitmer in 3rd and 8, 2nd and 9 situations where Whitmer feels like they have to throw the football? If you don't, you're not winning. And I think that's an easy bet. I would put money on that if I had to, but I guarantee you, if Whitmer runs for 250 tomorrow, they will absolutely win. I'll even go a step further. If Whitmer rushes for more than 200 yards as a team tomorrow, I think they win that game. They have to hold Whitmer to between 100 and 150 yards rushing, I think, to make sure they have enough time to score, but also that they're able to not allow the Panthers to dictate the pace of the game. And that was the other part that Whitmer did. Whitmer ate up huge chunks. People don't realize that score's 10-3 at halftime. That wasn't a blowout at halftime, but it felt like it because there wasn't one moment in that half where Whitmer was ever in trouble of not being able to move the football. And I don't see, if you can't make that change, you're not going to win.
There's one other thing that actually would dramatically change from this first game that it would be imperative for Perrysburg's defense to be able to do, as difficult as it's going to be, but they were able to do it a week ago, and that was going to be turn Whitmer over.
True. Very true.
At best, they did have, I believe, one turnover on downs earlier in the game, but that was it. Now, to be completely fair, it was a clean game both ways, and there was only an interception on Whitmer's side. I believe it was in the second.
There actually
half.
two. There was one late.
Two?
Yeah, but
okay.
Yeah.
I remember. All right, so I'm missing that one. So turnovers are especially if both teams are going to play at that level, getting one could be that major difference, and I think that is also going to be kind of that thing in the background. We have to be able to, like, if we're going to facing a lot of rushing, going to have to stop a lot of runs. You might want to kind of brush up on punching the ball out. If you can manage to knock one or two of those loose, that could change the whole complexion of the thing. And I know how cliche just saying that is as well, but in a possibility, in a game that could possibly be this close, the one fumble that you can't fall on, the one time a pass gets tipped to the line into a linebacker could be the difference between moving on and ending your season.
And as I said, the math is where it is. Can you be 32 points better than you were 2 weeks ago? And that's, I mean, we've seen, and you've seen enough football over the years. We've seen teams play twice in a year. And we've seen where I'll use Ohio State and Oregon as an example from last year. The second time Ohio State played Oregon, they absolutely shredded the Ducks. The difference, though, between game 1 and game 2 of that season last year was Ohio State lost by like a point in Eugene. You put that team on a neutral field, that flips things. We're not talking about a 7-point loss or a 10-point loss like it was the first time that Whitmer and Perrysburg played in 23. We're talking about essentially a 5-touchdown loss. That is hard to make up and flip. And I even go back, I remember in 2010, which is the first year that I started doing Whitmer football, and Whitmer played St. John's in the regional final in the state playoffs to go to the state Final Four. And that was the second time that they had played St. John's in that season. Now, that game ended up being very close, and it ended up that Whitmer, I think, only won like 21-17 or something in that range. I'm actually going to try and look it up now. But that was a game where you looked at Whitmer and you said, okay, they won the first time around. Won't be easy, but at the same time, it'll be closer, but it won't be necessarily a win. But it wasn't a big blowout. They only beat St. John's 49-24 the first time around. I don't remember all the context that went around that game. So to be fair, it's possible that there were some plays, that special teams plays, that made up for the 25-point gap. But again, even there, you're only talking about 3 touchdowns, which that's probably about the limit we're talking about of being able to flip the script at that point. And it ended up, the final of that was 14-10. It wasn't 21-17. It was 14-10. And you go back to that game, and the 4 points that I'm talking about, 4 or 5 points, that was the difference. So St. John's makes it up. They hold Whitmer under the 49 points. In fact, they did a great job. They take a team that scored 7 times on them, and they hold them to 2 scores. That's phenomenal. But at the same time, you scored 24 the first time around. You scored 2 less touchdowns, and you end up losing. And I believe that when you're talking about the math here, it's really hard to make up that kind of deficit. And it's not like we're talking about where best player was injured or guy who leading rusher was suspended or whatever the case. I mean, it was a fully healthy well, as healthy as you can be in week 10 Perrysburg team. I don't see how you would make that up unless you do some things that are drastically different. I will say Perrysburg has every motivation in the world because they were embarrassed. And Dirk Connor, his comments, I thought in the paper last week, he said it best. I was reading the article after the Ignatius win, and he said, we don't need any motivation for next week. We got all the motivation we needed last Friday. So that team is coming in for revenge. They have the proper motivation. Motivation only carries you so far, though. Does it carry you to a 32-point win? Make up that gap? I don't know. We're going to find out. But if I had to guess, I'd probably say no. We'll find out, as I said, but that's just such a big shift to make in 2 weeks. And you can only do so much. I mean, even going back to that St. John's Whitmer game that I'm talking about, Whitmer played St. John's in 2010 in week 5. And then they didn't see him again until week 13. So you had 8 weeks of growth between then as well. The team you see in week 5 is certainly not the team you're going to see in week 13. You're talking week 10 to week 12. How much different is it going to be?
Right.
So those are the questions. I mean, those are the big things that have to be answered. And those answers are largely going to determine whether or not this is a different outcome tomorrow night.
Certainly. Because there was the point that you were making about making up 32 points. And the question is also for Whitmer, are you going to hand any of those back? That's a big thing. I mean,
if the Panthers put up 35 points,
if
they put up 35 again, they're going to win.
Sure.
I just don't see how, if you put up 35 again, you don't win that football game. That defense is, I mean, which we haven't really given the flowers to the Whitmer defense. That defense is pretty good. They played really well against Perrysburg. You can argue that the Jackets may have taken themselves out of their own offense, but that Perrysburg or that Whitmer defense held that Perrysburg offense to 3 points, 40 yards rushing when they had come in averaging over 150 yards on the ground, and they only passed for like 1 something, and they only had 200 yards of total offense, and they turned Maxwell over twice and really could have had 4 interceptions because 2 picks went through DB's hands, and you had a fumble that you didn't recover. I mean, Whitmer's defense isn't going to give up 35 points. So, as you said, you're going to have to also give Whitmer or make Whitmer give you points back. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I feel confident in agreeing there, just seeing how this defense has responded and played week after week after week, that even when they haven't had their best nights, they've still been pretty good. And they have not opened the door for a minus 35 point differential on a night like that.
Yeah, unless they're getting penalized for like 22 penalties.
Yeah, I know, it's really weird, right?
We haven't seen the defense struggle unless they're literally getting penalized 22 times in a game for 100 and some odd yards. But
to be fair to the players, it was really only like 20.
That's true.
Sideline got a couple.
That's true. But I mean, you think about, again, just all the different things. That's where I don't want to sound like, as I said to you, you and I know better than anybody, but anybody who's listened to this show, if you follow what Dan and I do during the season, and this isn't to get up on my soapbox, but we spend a lot of time really trying to be neutral. Yes, we cover Whitmer. Yes, we call all their games. Yes, we're friends with the coaches. But when I'm on the air, when Dan's on the air, when Riley's on the air, we try and play it as down the middle as we possibly can. I want you to come away every week when you listen to our games. I don't want you to know what team I represent. That's how neutral I want you to think I am. So it's really hard for me to be this demonstrative and say, I just don't see it. And I will admit I am not the brightest man in the world. and I have been wrong plenty of times, but I've been around the game long enough. You've been around the game long enough. There aren't a lot of examples of 32-point swings in a season like that, especially in as short of a time frame that you have to turn it around.
That's exactly it. And that the more I was thinking about it, the more I was going, well, you always do need to, like, it is the playoffs, and that does influence many things. It's possible to completely turn things around. It's possible to, I don't know, lead a division by 15 and a half games and then decide to not bother playing for the last month of the season and get to the playoffs and almost and then start playing again and almost get to a championship level. It's possible to do. So you always have to leave that possibility out there. But I completely agree with what you're saying on the rest of the evaluation there.
So that's going to be fun tomorrow. I know that I can't wait. Pregame 6:30, Car Stereo 1 tailgate show. Dan, myself, Riley will preview the game. We'll have Justin Keller on. We'll talk about all the same things we're talking about tonight, a little more in depth, a little more organized, but and then kickoff at 7:00. And by 9:30 tomorrow, we'll know whether or not Harrisburg is able to pull off a statistical anomaly or not. And the numbers say no. Drew Pastor and his fantastic 50 say no. We'll see. I think that's going to be the big question. Some of the other teams that played last week, I know we spent a lot of time on Perrysburg Whitmer. We're going to talk about the NLL, all NLL teams here in a few moments, but do want to talk about Anthony Wayne. They beat Start last week. That was a closer game than people thought it was going to be. Credit Start, because I thought they played really hard in that playoff game. A lot of people did not give them much of a chance against the Generals. Anthony Wayne was able to throw the ball really well. We had talked so much about after they lost Roman Morrison that it was going to be really hard for them to figure out what were they going to do offensively because they just weren't able to run the ball. They ended up moving Jathan Volts, who was the backup quarterback, and he carried the ball a little bit. They also played him at receiver. Jathan Volts ended up getting moved to running back for Anthony Wayne. That has helped make that running game a little bit more efficient than what it was after they lost Roman Morrison. But they also threw the ball a lot better. But I credit Start because they lost by 3 touchdowns, but at points in that game, they were a player or two away from really making the Generals sweat. And I give credit to Nate James and the job that he's done over at Start. I know we don't talk a lot of City League teams here, but Nate, he's done a terrific job taking that Start program and leaving his dad's staff out at Northwood and taking that position and has made Start a formidable team or a competitive team each year. That's not easy to do, and especially to go on the road to Anthony Wayne, week 1 of the playoffs, to only lose by 3 touchdowns and, again, be in that game more so than that score showed. Credit to them. I thought they did a nice job. Also, credit to Porter Brungard. I thought he did a great job last week. Threw the ball extremely well. Really was why they were able to take advantage of some big plays. He was on the money with a lot of his throws. We've seen growth in that young man. He's going to have to continue to grow in the years to follow, not just physically, but also skill-wise, mentally as well. But expect to see big things and growth out of him in 2026. The problem for Anthony Wayne is they now have to go to North Ridgeville this week, and North Ridgeville is 9-1, and they lost to Avon, who's probably the best team in the state. We scrimmaged Avon, Whitmer did, and we saw how that went if you were at that scrimmage, but every other game that they've won. Now, what the Generals have going for them, North Ridgeville does give up a lot of points. They gave up 34 to Olmsted Falls. They gave up 28 to Amherst. They gave up 14 to Avon Lake, 35 to Berea Mid Park. These are all wins, by the way. 24 to Midview, Grafton Midview. So there are examples of North Ridgeville not being able to slow opposing offensives down. The problem for Anthony Wayne is there also aren't a lot of examples where their offense has been slowed down. There's 2 games where they scored less than 28 points. There's only 2. One of them was a loss, one was a close win, and every other game they either scored 28 or more points. Got to be tough for that general defense, and I imagine that a lot of people are going to be looking at what the Jackets did to them in week 9, what Whitmer did to Anthony Wayne in week 6. They're going to look at those 2 examples, and North Ridgeville, I imagine, is going to have some variation of that game plan. Generals have a chance. Going to be a tough one on the road, but Generals have a chance. I think the prognosticator in me feels like it's North Ridgeville's to lose, but Anthony Wayne has shown growth. This isn't a North Ridgeville team that's been super dominant all year long. We'll see. Competition in Northeast Ohio is very good as well, so I don't want to besmirch that either, because I do think that the teams in Northeast Ohio on average are better than the teams in Northwest Ohio. But even still, I would argue that it's still probably North Ridgeville's to lose at this point. Generals could sneak in there and get a win. We'll see how that all fares. But that's one, like I said, I think the road factor is going to be hard too. Younger team. We'll see, but it's not going to be an easy road by any stretch for Anthony Wayne. Could get it done. We'll see how. We'll know tomorrow night, like we talked about with Whitmer and Perrysburg. Any thoughts on that one at all?
Now, I was kind of looking a little bit at the North Olmsted resume, and that's what actually stands out to me is how you would just look at these numbers and go, they've been in too many competitive games. You feel like that'd be a bit of a grind, but look, if your offense is able to put up nearly 31 a game, to do quick back of the envelope math, if you're able to put up 31 a game and that's your average, I feel like you're probably good enough to win almost all track meets that you're going to run into. So that might just be the case of that Anthony Wayne will probably they'll play hard. They'll know they'll be tough. The defense will be ready. They just may North Ridgeville might just run away from them before they could really have a chance to get settled. And it's very tough to dig out of a hole, especially in week 12.
Especially when you're on the road on top of it.
Especially on the road.
One of the teams that got a bye, or one of the 3 teams that got a bye in the first round from the Northern Lakes League, was Findlay. They will open up at home tomorrow against Huber Heights Wayne, which, for those of you who don't know, Dayton area school, Huber Heights Wayne. Jay Minton, I don't know if anybody knows that name, was probably one of the best coaches that's ever coached at that school. He's not there anymore, but that's a name that always is synonymous. Braxton Miller, Huber Heights Wayne grad. So really good players out of that school. 7-4. You've got Findlay, who is 6-4. I just said to you a couple moments ago about Perrysburg having to get up off the mat after a disappointing end to their regular season. Well, Findlay's in a weird spot because they had a difficult end to their regular season. They lose 20-19 to Anthony Wayne, and then they got a week to think about that. This is where this is different for me. Stephen Adams, you and I have talked about him. Mason was on with us. Mason Lowry from BCSN's been on with us. We're all in agreement. Stephen Adams is a terrific guy, one of the best to talk to. I guarantee he is absolutely chomping at the bit to get whatever taste resides in his mouth from week 10 out tomorrow night. Huber Heights Wayne, though, that's a schedule. The teams that they've lost to: Pick Central, 9-1. St. Ed's, 8-2. Springfield, 7-4. Bad loss against Beaver Creek, 4-6. But 3 of the 4 losses are to playoff teams. 2 of those losses are to 2 of the best teams in the state. That is a very tough schedule. Not to mention the fact that they also played Springboro, who's, if you follow Division One, usually in the conversation. And those are not easy games to win. I don't know if Findlay has enough athleticism to keep up with the Warriors tomorrow. I like what Findlay has done, and I like the adjustments that they made on the offensive side. I love that they were able to pivot mid-season and go to a more of a ground game. And you and I were so impressed by the effort and the attitude that Findlay team plays with. They don't quit. They don't roll over. We saw that 28-0 down to Whitmer in the first half. 6 minutes to go in the second quarter. I turned to Riley Keller and said, we might get a running clock. Boy, was I wrong. 35-33 is the final. And the Panthers had to hold on and hope that Findlay didn't get into field goal territory. And thank God for LJ Glover, because he made the interception and Whitmer's able to be 8-2. But so close was Findlay to getting a 7th win and Whitmer getting a 3rd loss in the regular season. That was a game that we were really impressed with and left out of the stadium going, oh man, this team is not one that just waves the white flag and goes down easily. However, from a athletic standpoint, it's hard for me to envision anybody at Wayne High School not thinking or being pretty confident going into tomorrow that they've got a pretty good shot of getting the win on the road. And their first round game was against Westland High School out of Columbus, who they beat 36-6. Not much of a challenge. I don't think you can take a whole lot out of that, but that's a really good athletic program. And that's probably the most athletic team that Findlay will have seen this year. No disrespect to Whitmer, but that's probably going to be up there as far as one of the most gifted physically in the state of Ohio. Not saying they can't win, much like we talked about with Anthony Wayne. I think they've got a shot. I don't think they have as good of a shot as Anthony Wayne does, but I could see Findlay pulling off an upset, even though they're the higher seed. I could see them pulling off, but the one that's the game that scares me is their result against Anthony Wayne. That was one where we had not seen Findlay choke a game away yet this year. And usually we've seen historically where Findlay will lose a game that they should not lose. And yes, I did just get talking about how Anthony Wayne is better, but that based off of what we saw, that Findlay team should have been able to get the win at their place in week 10. Senior night, you should have been able to get that win, I would think. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of what happened. I don't know. Maybe Miles Bailey got hurt and we're not aware of it. I don't know. But I will say, on paper, Findlay's a better team than Anthony Wayne this year. That game is the one that makes me think I don't know that they're going to have enough in the stable to be able to keep up with Huber Heights Wayne.
Something that you alluded to very early on, though, and there's a possibility of how Findlay approaches this one, is you also know that Stephen Adams has had now 2 weeks to do
that is true
a tremendous coaching job. And that may have been all they did last week was kind of not stew on a loss, but and not try to focus on just, trying to forget it like it never happened, but focusing on the good that came out of that game and maximizing opportunities to eliminate those mistakes. And that is so far down the cliched coach speak road. I'm not sure what exit sign I'm looking at anymore, but that's, like you said, that like how they need to turn that around, turn the negative into a positive, take that extra week of rest, take that extra week of teaching and learning. And if there's a coach that in this area that's going to be able to get the most out of that bye week, it's probably Stefan.
One guy they will have to contend with, Jameer Brown, who, for those who don't know, committed to Ohio State end of last year. 4-star athlete, currently ranked as the number 1 player in Ohio in 2027. Currently the number 2 wide receiver in 2027 class, and also the 11th best player nationally in 2027. That's not going to be easy to take care of. As I said, probably the most athletically gifted team that they've seen this year.
Fair
that
call.
kind of confirms that a little bit, I think.
Just a bit, yes.
Last one that we'll talk about from the Northern Lakes League before we get into the all-league teams. Napoleon, they had a first-round bye. We talked with Tyler Swery, as we said, last Thursday. He talked to us about what he was going to do with that bye week. As he accurately predicted, he thought he was going to have Sandusky Perkins. That is indeed who the Wildcats have. And if you're looking at the prognostications that we kind of typically look at, these guys who are high school junkies like Dan and myself, the prediction is that Napoleon will lose to Sandusky Perkins by 17. This is one that I'm not sure I'm with Drew Pasteur on. And I have told you guys, if you are a regular listener to this podcast or viewer, I have told you guys that there is a attitude that happens at Napoleon that group is just never fazed by anybody. And as you go down the list of teams that Perkins beat this year, not that it's not impressive, because beating Bellevue, who's 8-3, beating Columbian, who's 500, those aren't bad wins. But if you're going to beat Napoleon, you think you'd beat St. Francis. They lost to him by 6. That was a game that Drew said that he predicted Perkins to win by 13. They lost their opening game to Clear Fork. That was a game that he picked them to win by 33. They lost by 3. Not saying Drew gets everything right. It's all algorithmic. It's all mathematics. We just talked about it. Sometimes the math don't math. It happens. But this is one I don't agree with. I think Napoleon gets the job done tomorrow night. I like them at home. I think with the way that they control the line of scrimmage, the way that they control the clock, that's where, if I'm Tyler Swery, I've got George Eggers, I've got the offense that I have, defense that I have. I feel good about where I'm at going into this game tomorrow night. And as we said, that was a team that Tyler told us last week they needed that week to get healthy. This is the healthiest they've probably been since week 1 of the season. And I like where this Napoleon team sits. They have surprised a lot of teams the last few years, especially when they've been like 5-5 or 6-4. This year, they were 8-2 and beat some teams and were in games with some teams that they really didn't have any business being in. And I think about the way that they finished on the run that they did. This is a team that beat Clay. Whoever lost to Clay, they beat Clay by 8. They only lost 7-0 to Anthony Wayne. That is not in any remotely sense of the word something that people thought would happen earlier in the year. And every game that was supposed to be close wasn't. The closest game they played at the end of the year was that defensive slugfest with Fremont Ross to clinch the Cardinal division. That was still a game on the road at Don Paul Stadium. Also, if you're a frequent listener of this podcast, you've heard us say Don Paul Stadium to me is like the Bermuda Triangle of stadiums in Northwest Ohio. Weird stuff happens there all the time. Every time Whitmer's there, something weird happens. But they got the win. I like how Napoleon sets up. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I like them against Perkins tomorrow night.
I want to go back to last week when we talked to Tyler and just point something out, because he makes the point that there's always that grit that we recognize that
Correct.
seems to be worth at least a touchdown in these predictions, one way or the other. But he made the point that his team is used to seeing the bigger side of this.
Mm-hmm.
They're a Division 4 team and everything that comes with being a Division 4 team on the smaller side of the school, and they didn't play a single Division 4 team this entire year. It's been all Division 2 and 3 because that's the conference they're in and that's the area that they play in. And he's basically said that we make our reputation on going, we're going to play up every single week in our season, so that, I mean, that's the cards we're dealt. But also when we are playing on what would be essentially level footing with the rest of our division, we've seen it. We've faced it. There's nothing that Perkins is going to throw at them that is going to be so surprising that they don't know how to handle it. And I think that is also a huge advantage for this squad as well. And it'll definitely be this weekend. It could very well be, should they win and move on and face nothing but those top 4 seeds going forward, they are built differently possibly than those 4 other big top seeds in their region. So it'll be very interesting to see how that is. But I agree with you. I don't agree with not only the 17-yard point predicted loss, but the level of confidence from Drew. Not sure how. Not quite sure. We've been looking at the same football team.
I would agree. And how often do you have it? I know Whitmer had this, but how often do you have it where your 2 tailbacks are first team and second team all league? And that is a good segue into that. But you think about in the Cardinal division, Hayden Grohl's the first teamer, George Eggers is the second team back. That speaks to they're a pretty good running football team too. But let's talk about the all league teams. This was just announced today. We will have some of the scroll. We tried to type them in as fast as we could. I'll read them off as well. Some of the highlights: Brady Maxwell and Joey Morales are your co-offensive players of the year. Brady, of course, is first-team quarterback. Landon Eckelberry, I don't think is a shock, as the second-team quarterback. Whitmer places all 3 backs on the Buckeye division first or second team. Jamon and Joey are your first team. Jaden Jones is a second teamer along with Liam Nowakowski. Wide receiver was interesting because we didn't have a lot of really prolific passing teams this year. Like, there was not a Ryan Montgomery in the division this year. There wasn't a guy that just could sling it all over the yard. And this is kind of an interesting cross-section of receivers, because the team that I actually felt like probably had the best group of receivers is the one that's represented maybe the most on the second team, and that's the Northview receivers. You and I came away really impressed with what we saw at Northview in week 7 with Whitmer and Steve Wiederhold, who we really were impressed with after that game as well. Nick Elton was another guy that really came on in that game. Those are second teamers for Northview. Max Morrison, who had a good game against Whitmer, and then Brandon Waddell, who, when I think about receivers that I did not expect, I don't want to say anything from, but I didn't expect to have the impact that they've had, especially on this Whitmer team. Brandon's at the top of that list, and he's at the top of the list because not the biggest kid in the world. He's got some speed, but they have not used Brandon in a traditional sense, and that's a wide receiver room that has gone through some transformation this year. And I won't get into the specifics of what happened, but Brandon probably went from option B or C to having to be the team's number 1 receiver for several of the games. And he did a fantastic job. I was really happy to see that he made second team. I was kind of hoping he made first team, but the guys that got it first team, Carter Imke, who was really good for Findlay, Ethan DeVries for Perrysburg, his numbers were phenomenal, and then Cam Miller from Anthony Wayne. As I said, not a whole lot of really huge passing teams this year, and I think that kind of speaks to why we saw what we saw. Tight end wise, Brody Ostrander's your first team from Clay, and then Hudson Yeager from Findlay. Reed Gherkin, no surprise at one offensive tackle spot. Kyler Koopmans, again, no surprise from Whitmer at the other tackle spot. Braden Cole and Brody Smith, Anthony Wayne, and Findlay are your second teamers. Guards, this was the one where I was really surprised because I can't remember the last time that this happened. First team guards, we'll start with the one that I don't know, didn't surprise me or I'm not surprised by is Giovanni Ambrister, who's from Findlay. And then you had Justin Leachty and Isaiah Reed from Clay and Perrysburg, respectively. But the other first teamer, Carter Baldwin, a freshman from Whitmer. I don't know the last time a freshman, especially on the line, was named a first teamer, but I got a little bit of insight to the voting on this, and I was told that Carter Baldwin was a unanimous first teamer. So it wasn't even like this was a close vote. Carter Baldwin was a unanimous first team selection. Every coach voted him first team. That's high praise for a kid who's a freshman, and it's going to only get better.
That is incredible. However, if you've seen him throughout the year work on that line, does not a surprising thing at all. And that's, I will say, that's one of the things being on the sideline you're kind of afforded the ability to do is focus on one specific aspect of the game. And it's been a couple of weeks where I've focused in and zeroed in and paid close attention to what's happening in the trenches. And it is incredible to see how well Carter Baldwin has not only adapted to the high school game, but is already moving up levels. I mean, he did just, I think go back to that period, to the one Perrysburg touchdown. It's going to be the ones Perry's touchdown scored against Perrysburg. And I remember saying Baldwin laid a block so heavy. I think I felt it, and I was standing 10 yards away from the end zone. So yeah, I cannot wait to see what this young man looks like in his sophomore and his junior and his senior seasons. And I think he's the next Whitmer O lineman that we're going to talk about as going to a Power 4 school.
Agreed. And those offers aren't quite there yet, but they are starting to filter in the Division I. MAC offers are starting to come in. And if you're getting MAC offers as a freshman, usually by your senior year, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Michigans, the Floridas, Texases, they come calling. And do not be shocked if what we talked about with Carter Lowe, who's now at Ohio State, another Carter Baldwin, is not being talked about in the same vein when he's all said and done. Augustine Lohmeyer's your first team center from Clay. Ethan Zarowski, the second team center from Whitmer. And then utility players. I was happy to see Miles Bailey got some credit. Again, we were really impressed with him. Guy who got moved from running back and linebacker to quarterback at Findlay. Did a nice job. Mason Taylor for Anthony Wayne, and then Thad Merriman for Perrysburg. And kicker-wise, Braden Heitmeyer is by far the best kicker. I think Grayson Geiser is close at Findlay, but Braden Heitmeyer has been doing it for all 4 years, and he deserves that. And then Reed Gherkin was the lineman of the year in the Buckeye division. Could argue that it should have been maybe somebody else, but Reed's been pretty good, and he's also had a lot of offers as well. So interested to see where he ends up. Defensively, Gunnar Hansen from Anthony Wayne at defensive end, Zach Aubrey. You and I have gotten to witness the true unbelievability of Zach every week. So totally justified. Zach was another guy that was a unanimous one. That one not as surprising as Carter Baldwin.
New.
Jack Young from Findlay, Malik Beck are the second teamers, Findlay and Perrysburg. Max Grabarczyk from Anthony Wayne, and then Brandon Dempsey, who I think had a quiet year at Whitmer. But Brandon is a guy that eats up space and really has allowed Zach and Tim Petaway and Jameel Lyons and some of the other defensive ends to get sacks. Gianna Wolkowski, who's the nose for Perrysburg, ended up being a second teamer, and I expect big things out of him. I'm really excited to see how he grows for Perrysburg. And then Conrad Adams from Northview is a second teamer. Linebackers were Mateo Harmon and Michael Duvall, Anthony Wayne and Perrysburg respectively. And then Caleb Caney and Brock Duvall were your second teamers. Brock Duvall from Whitmer, Caleb from Findlay. Outside backers, LJ Glover, who you and I have got to witness. He's been awesome this year. Sebastian Brandcamp, who made just about every tackle in the game against Whitmer. And then he's from Findlay. And then Jathan Volts, Anthony Wayne, Jonathan Butterfield from Perrysburg. Those are your second teamers. Corners were Eli Donowa from Anthony Wayne, Darnell Gray from Perrysburg. And then other ones were Mason Hetrick and Cam Sanders. Those are your second teamers, Mason from Findlay and then Cam Sanders from Whitmer. Safeties were Will Hammer and Hayden Knobloch. Will's from Findlay, Hayden from Perrysburg, and then Kyle Henneman from Clay and Dom Arndt from Whitmer, your second teamers. Punter, we said, not a surprise, Braden Heitmeyer was great. And then Bo Seelenbinder for Anthony Wayne, and then LJ Glover. This is really a nice reward for him to be Buckeye Division Defensive Player of the Year. So congrats to those guys. Cardinal Division, Logan Goodrick from Springfield's your first teamer. Jackson Hesse is your second teamer at quarterback. Tailbacks, we mentioned already, Hayden Grohl from Napoleon, Talon Brown for Fremont Russ, who we didn't get to see at tailback because he was hurt that night. George Eggers from Napoleon, Mo MacArthur from Southview were your second teamers. Mason England from Fremont Ross, Adam LaPlace, and Byron Jackson of Springfield were your first teamers at receiver. Second teamer receivers, Mason Snyder from Bowling Green, Stephen Ryder from Fremont Ross, and Lance Lucio from Southview. Tight end, Jackson Mackey from Fremont Ross is your first team. Quentin Maynard from Napoleon, second team. Linemen, they didn't do positions. They just did straight linemen. Cole Myers, not a shot from Fremont Ross. Spencer Durham from Napoleon. Lucas Gherkin from Napoleon. Peyton Carlton from Southview. Chad Sadowski from Springfield are your first teamers. Second team linemen, Bronson Schobinger from Bowling Green. Caden Swint from Fremont Ross. Tristan Mertz from Napoleon. Dean Anning from Southview. Hunter Kristen from Southview are your linemen. Utility player Cole Kerrigan from Napoleon is your first team. Colton Shank from Bowling Green. Place kicker Landon Jones was first team. Jack Mowry from Napoleon was your second team. Offensive player of the year was Hayden Grohl from Napoleon. And then lineman of the year, again, not a shock, is Cole Myers from Fremont Ross, who is just a massive humanity at that tackle spot. Also, going to find out here in a second that he's low on the defensive line as well. Defensive end first teamers, George Eggers, Marquez Williams from Fremont Ross. You and I talked so much about with Chad Long, too, how good that defensive line was from Fremont Ross. So it's good to see all of those guys well represented. Talon Brown is a second teamer, as well as Desarion Loggins from Southview. Cole Myers, first team defensive tackle, as well as Lucas Gherkin from Napoleon. Aiden Rollader from Bowling Green, Fred McCoy, and Mardell McCarver from Springfield, McCoy from Southview. Those are your second teamers. Inside backers, first teamers, Matthew Statelitz from Bowling Green, Max Swihart from Napoleon, Michael Miller from Southview, Declan Keller from Springfield, your second teamers. First team outside backers, we're almost done with this, I promise. Jake Hunter from Bowling Green, Cade Reinick from Fremont Ross. Second teamers, Tristan Fellows from Napoleon, Alex Yaki from Southview. First team corners, Kevin Jones from Ross, Adam LaPlace from Southview. Second teamers, Paul Saucer from Napoleon, Thomas Hayes from Springfield. Safeties, Mason England from Fremont Ross. First teamer, Ryan Seiler from Springfield. Second team safeties, Colby Joseph from Bowling Green, Tucker Shepard from Napoleon. Punter was Logan Goodrick. And then Braylon Garza was second team punter. And defensive player of the year was Marquez Williams from Fremont Ross. So congratulations, all those guys. I wanted to say them all, or at least get them up, because I don't know that everybody always realizes some of these guys, this is well-deserved and maybe don't get their name called enough. So wanted to make sure I said them all. Before we get out of here, I do want to talk about some of the other local games real quick. Central Catholic gets a win last week. They're at Lexington on Friday. We have talked about this multiple times. I said to you before, when you have to go on the road, it's totally different when they have to come to you. Lexington is a team that Central barely beat in the playoffs last year. As our good buddy Mason Lowry told us, everybody from Lexington is back. Does that mean Central loses? Don't know. Probably not. I still think Central is the best team in Region 10. But that's not going to be a simple game tomorrow. Curious to see how that goes. But the Irish blew out their first round opponent, and they are on the road in Lexington tomorrow. St. Francis, one of the other teams that won their first round playoff game, they beat Valley Forge 33-7. They get the unenviable task of going to Wadsworth, who is undefeated. Good luck to the Knights. Don't see that one resulting in a St. Francis win. In fact, Drew Pastor has them winning, meaning Wadsworth, by 32. And then the other game that we talk a lot about, if I wasn't doing Whitmer, what game would I want to do? This is my upset special here. I'm not picking this team, but I think there could be an upset in this game. Liberty Center welcomes in Oak Harbor. You sit there and say, Chris, you're absolutely nuts because Liberty Center has not been challenged at all this year. Au contraire. Archbold, week 10. They're up at halftime. Liberty Center does go on to win that game. Tigers finish undefeated. You get a week off. Liberty Center has not played in a week. We discussed that rest versus rust. How much is that going to affect the Tigers? Don't know. Flip side, Oak Harbor hits the skids middle of the year because they had an injury, from what we've heard, to the quarterback. Quarterback supposedly is now back. You've seen Oak Harbor, for the most part, look more like Oak Harbor has done throughout the remainder of this year. It's a big if, but if Liberty Center starts slow tomorrow and Oak Harbor does not, that could be an upset. And I say that because I'm going to guess that Mike May, who's the head coach at Oak Harbor, has studied what Archbold did in that first half. Gonna guess that he has taken whatever that game plan was and found whatever the common threads are between those games or those two teams, and he's going to go out with a similar game plan to what Archbold showed in week 10. As I said, it's a big if because the Tigers have not been challenged very often this year. But the game that they were challenged in was Archbold because they were down, I believe it was 14-10 at half, I think. Don't quote me on that. They end up winning 33-14. They woke up in the second half. And Archbold's a really good football team. So take that for what it's worth. But Oak Harbor has been really good. And it's very possible that Liberty Center is taking them lightly. I could be way off my rocker and Liberty Center wins by 50 tomorrow. I will readily admit that I could be way off base here. I don't know what it is about this game, but I expect this one to be way closer than people think it's going to be tomorrow. And I'm not saying Oak Harbor wins that game, but I would put money, if I could, that Oak Harbor would, whatever that spread is, if Drew Pastor is setting it at 31 points, I think I'll take the 31. I think Oak Harbor absolutely loses by less than that if in that game. Even if they don't win, they're not losing by 31 tomorrow. I'd put money on that. We don't because we're not degenerates. However,
speak for yourself.
However, I am not sold that a week off probably didn't have your sharpest finish in week 10. I'm not sold that Liberty Center is just going to walk out there and roll Oak Harbor. Could totally happen. Probably I'm off my rocker, like I said, and it's going to happen. But I just have a feeling about that game. When Oak Harbor beat Eastwood last week, that's a game that Oak Harbor lost the first time around 42-7. 42-6, excuse me. And they win last week 32-26. And it was really worse than that because Eastwood scored some late touchdowns. When we talk about can you make up a 30-plus point swing? Yes, you can. But the difference between what happened with Eastwood and Oak Harbor is one of Oak Harbor's best players didn't play in that first matchup. Some Eastwood folks said that wouldn't have mattered. I disagree. But regardless, that's how you swing in that direction. These two teams have not played each other this year. We will see. But don't be shocked if that's a close game on Friday or tomorrow night, I should say. That's my mic drop moment. That's
All
my
right.
one. If I were,
it's to tape, so be ready for this to come back.
I know.
Should this in fact
I'm
be a
literally gonna
60-3? Yeah,
I'm gonna get what does that fat bald guy know? And I'm sure, sadly, it's gonna be Dean Araki that's gonna be quoting that on the comments on that. But no, I don't know why I have a feeling about that one. I just do. I feel like that might be one that Liberty Center is not ready for. I think the Oak Harbor team is better than the two losses. And again, they'll probably lose, but I don't think it's going to be just Liberty Center rolling it out there and winning 56-10 or something like that. I don't think it's going to be that lopsided. Could be wrong. I know I've said that multiple times. I want to make it abundantly clear. I am not above saying that I could be totally nuts on this, but it just feels like Oak Harbor could make that very interesting. And as I said, the telltale sign will be, what is that score at the end of the first quarter? If that's a 7-0 game, especially if Oak Harbor's up, that's going to be a 4-quarter game for Liberty Center. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
You don't seem as convinced, and that's fine.
Now I again, it's the playoffs. I believe everything is possible. If I've learned anything from one Mr. Kevin Garnett, and we've seen there are just in the divisions in our area, we see a couple of 11 seeds moving on to play 3 seeds this week. So, double-digit upsets are not impossible whatsoever.
Last thing I will leave you with, and this is something that you and I kind of touched upon when we were talking in pre-show, was what is the metric going to be for bye teams coming out of this week? And we kind of touched upon it a little bit with some of the other teams already, of what does a bye look like and how are teams affected. Dave Briggs, who is the columnist for the Blade, if you have a Blade subscription, you didn't read his column from the other day, because he talked about the movement from 16 teams to 12 teams and how OHSAA may have finally got it right. I don't know that I 100% agree with the 12 teams. I like the 8 teams, but as is any red-blooded American business, even if you are a nonprofit, OHSAA wanted more money. They needed more money, so that's why you got an expanded playoff. And the happy medium was going to 12 teams because so many people hated 16. It was very unpopular. Where the change this year, as we talked about, is those bye games or those bye weeks. What's the record for these teams coming off of these bye weeks? And that, and you already heard some people kind of talk about it on the college football playoff side, that they felt as though the byes hurt a lot of teams. Oregon, as we talked about earlier, is the perfect example of a team that was really, and we're talking about a week versus a month, which is what Oregon was off, but those byes, they're not always the easiest, especially when you're not used to doing it. This is the first time in the history of high school football that you've had bye weeks. Ohio high school football, I should say.
Yep.
So how did you handle it? What did you do? How sharp are you? And 1 year sample sizes will not dictate what the state does if they go back to 8. But rest assured that if you see over the next couple of years, and it'll start tomorrow night, if you see a lot of, and I'm not talking about the 4 versus 5s, I'm talking about the 1-8s, the 2-7s, the 3-6s. If you see a lot of those kinds of upsets, the 1-8s and the 2-7s, and you get some of those state powers that get upset,
things will change. Yeah.
Things will change again.
Yep.
Correct. And don't be shocked if it is a consistent thing that there starts to be a growing rumbling again to go back to 8 teams. I don't think the state will do it, at least not with the current administration that's in place. But as you just said, if the big boys are out, especially in Division I, and especially if they're Cleveland and Columbus teams, fully expect that you may not hear anything this year. You might not even hear anything next year. But if it becomes a common theme where the teams that go on first round buys do not win that second round playoff game, mark my words, they will start complaining about it, and OHSAA will have to deal with the fallout from that. And we won't know till tomorrow. And like I said, it's not anything that'll be solved in 2026 or 2027, probably not even 2028. It took us 4 years to get the 16 team problem solved. So it might take that many years if it is. Now, maybe much less of a concern, but there are a lot of coaches, and I've heard from some of them. I've read quotes from some of them. There are a lot of coaches who are nervous about having a bye. And as I said jokingly at the beginning, Tyler Swery told us when I asked him, do you like the first round bye? He said, I'll let you know next Friday. And I don't know that any coach and anybody who had a first round bye, if they tell you they know it's going to happen tomorrow, they do not, because you just don't know with 15, 16, 17 high school aged kids, high schoolers at that age. So just one thing to leave you with. We'll see. But why don't I remind you again, if you do want to listen to Whitmer Perrysburg tomorrow, we'll be on 105.5 here in Toledo. You can check us out, q1055.com. Pregame show 6:30, kickoff 7 o'clock. Myself, Riley Keller, Dan will be on the call for that one. Looking forward to it. Of course, if you want to get the audio version of this, you can do it at all of these venues you see in front of you: Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spreaker, and Podcast Addict. Those are where you can get the audio version of it. And of course, we will be live on YouTube, and you can watch it on our channel, NLL Weekly. Please like and subscribe. Please rate the show. Let us know. It does help the algorithm. It does help us get a little bit more visibility. Again, I know this has been a wonky year for us. If you haven't listened every week, it's been weird scheduling wise. Had a family issue this year that kind of kept us off a regular schedule, but do appreciate the support. Folks from Whitmer really buying in, and I think he might be listening, but Scott Waddell, Brandon Waddell's dad, has been great about sharing it out and promoting it. So I appreciate him and all the folks that have done that this year. So do appreciate that. So we will be back next week. We're going to do another show, and we'll probably put a bow on football season in general, talk about surprises, the disappointments, where we see things going. Liberty Benton's going to be added next year. What does that look like? All these different conversations to be had. And we'll also start turning our attention to basketball and talk about that. And we had some success with the winter shows last year. We'll plan on doing those again this year. And we're excited to kind of start turning the page to basketball. As long as Whitmer's going, we'll have those games on Q1055, so don't worry about that. But we'll probably put a little bit of a bow on high school football season next week. So want to thank our sponsor, of course, Car Stereo One. Thank you to Parker Lopez and his team. Thanks those of you listening. Appreciate the time. Thanks to all the coaches who've been so good this year. And again, as I said, thanks to you guys for listening. We will see you next week. Have a great week. We'll see you later.